Hi everybody. So I am connecting with Liz Scott today to have a talk about well-being listening and its potential in at a local level, but also perhaps even broader than that, in how it can help people in distress presenting to their GP. Um, my name is Bryan McElroy. I work as a GP and I have a special interest in mental health. I've written a chapter on antidepressant prescribing in general practice recently, and I also give talks to GPs, education talks around mental health, and I do a little bit of well-being one-to-one work also. I guess what Liz and I share in common is that we both have an appreciation for and some training in something called the inside out understanding or listening into well-being. There's different names for it, but we both have, I guess, a lot of excitement, and we really feel the potential of this perhaps being impactful for people. Um, so I'm going to just ask Liz maybe to introduce herself and introduce what this amazing project called Listening into Wellbeing happened.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Brian. It's lovely to see you today. Yes, I'm based on the southern edge of Dartmoor in Devon, and my local community is Ivy Bridge. And I have a background as a coach. I also trained as a counsellor, and I've also had a career in the BBC. So I've done lots of different bits during my time. But like you said, we both, didn't we, Brian? We came across something called the inside out understanding, and I've got to say that really changed the way I started coaching. But first of all, it really changed the way that I started to turn up in life, because I noticed that I wouldn't say I was excessively worried and anxious about things, but I noticed that it was almost like someone had turned the volume down on my anxiety and worry. And I couldn't quite work out why, because I wasn't really doing anything to try and fix it. And then I began to realize that there was something quite magical in what we call the inside out understanding, which was making a difference for me. And I could really see that it could make a difference for the people I work with. And so the project that you're referring to is something I'm running in Ivy Bridge. I've got this idea of Ivy Bridge becoming a listening town, and it's got about 12,000 residents, and the surrounding parishes are quite rural, so it includes the surrounding parishes, which takes up to about 16,000 people in total. And what I've seen is that when people listen in a particular way, when they listen for well-being, which is what we're sort of talking about today, in the same way that my anxiety and worry sort of just fell away, when we listen for well-being in others, it really helps them for their worry and anxiety to fall away. So it's really just helping people to listen in a slightly different way, so that you're really shining a light on the bit in people which is resilient and grounded, and you kind, or mixing my metaphors, blowing on the flame of that. So that's the bit that really comes to the fore for them. So that's I started last year, and this year we started a social enterprise, and we run wellbeing listener training programs, and we're just starting to really engage with the community groups and leaders in the town, and getting them to start to engage with what we're up to. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a whistle stop tour of what I'm doing.
Amazing, Liz. Yeah, amazing. And one of the things that comes to mind, a quote I heard from an inside out facilitator in the past was um, uh, intimacy. So the word intimacy, obviously, it has loads of connotations, but intimacy, as in personal connection, involves listening to someone with nothing on your mind, and that's always stayed with me. And I thought it's really lovely, because I guess what I think what we're what we've been pointed to and what we point people to in our work is that when we have little on our mind, we tend to feel well. When we have a lot on our mind, we tend to feel heavy, burdened, um, anxious, etc., etc. And listening to someone with nothing on your mind is both helpful for the listener, because you get to see that person afresh without judgment, but then the other person also hears that. They feel that, so they're able to communicate in a different way, and even the kind of the kind of connection between people changes, because one person listening from that very open space can sometimes just change the other person without them even wanting to change, for want of better words, or
Yeah,
without them trying to change.
that's a really, I think you kind of hit something there, because what we're talking about, particularly with this project in Ivy Bridge, is not so much that we identify people that are very distressed and mentally upset and they need to be sat down and have a good listening to. It's much more that we're just engaging in a slightly different way with people, so that they kind of come out of a conversation just going, oh, I feel really good, I feel much better now. And it's very simple, like you say, listening to someone with nothing on your mind, it does something to their minds. It's that I don't know what it is. I mean, you're the doctor, but I don't know what that is, the magic bit in my world, but I'm sure there's some science behind it somewhere.
But science is catching up with a lot of these things. I think um, like we know a lot more now than we did 50 or 100 years ago. But still, when it comes to like, if you asked any like really good scientist, well, what exactly is a thought? How is a thought formed? Or what is consciousness and how is consciousness formed? They wouldn't be able to tell you. And if they thought that they could, then they're probably not talking a bit of rubbish, to be honest, because those kind of things are really, they literally are a little bit beyond the conceptual mind, and I'm not sure if science will ever figure them out.
Mm.
Um,
I was going to say, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know if you come across this, but a lot of people have those. I guess I'd call them more philosophical questions that they do that they do get curious about. Um, and I've just found that probably my coaching has become more philosophical in a way, and giving people time and space just to kind of engage in those very gentle inquiries for themselves, because it just seems quite nourishing. Not everybody, if somebody doesn't want to do it, of course not. But when we start to really look within and say, well, which is the bit of me that's actually real, like not the bit that comes and goes, and not the bit that is like the cloudy storm of emotions and feelings. What is the bit that's the core of me? And we have some really rich reflections on that, and we don't really get to any answers because there isn't really an answer, but there's something about pointing our attention in that direction.
yeah.
So I'm kind of more philosophical, I guess, in my coaching these days.
And even though there's not, let's say, a specific answer in words, what can happen is a change of feeling, and quite a drastic change of feeling sometimes, when when you can realize that, at a deeper level, you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings. They come and go, and there's something else there that that is, as you mentioned, resilient, or that's just present behind us all.
Mm.
Um, which is, I guess, coming back to why I'm really interested in this area, is that I guess as GPs, sometimes it seems to me that we're almost trained to do the opposite. We're trained to shine the light on the distress, gather as much information about the distress as possible, and then formulate like a diagnosis or a kind of concept or a label that will kind of encapsulate that, and then find a specific treatment pathway for that presentation, be it anxiety or depression or insomnia or a whole host of things that we have names for nowadays. I think there's over 500 things in the current diagnostic statistics manual, so there's a lot of forms that distress can take. And I guess for me, when I've been listening to these conversations, there's something really simple that I think could could really change a lot of how we meet distress in the community, whether it's GPs meeting people in distress, or social prescribers, or people like yourself, with your initiative, or perhaps something else altogether in the future, that we could listen in a different way. Because as doctors, it seems to me that we listen to people with a lot on our minds, even though we don't think we have a lot on our minds. Actually, we're trained to kind of think about, okay, what is this person presenting with, and how can I help them? And we're also trained to do that in 10 minutes.
Yes.
so
I mean,
so
that's not conducive, is it, for what we're talking about here, I suppose, which is in my language a bit more of a spacious conversation. And I think the expectation, I mean, tell me if I'm right here, but I guess if I've got the courage to go to a doctor to talk about something that's been troubling me for a little while, I kind of want to be told that, one, I've got something, so yes, there is something there, and then, can you fix it for me, please? It's almost like taking the car to the mechanic, isn't it? Like, do you find that's
Yeah.
how your patients come to you? Is that what they want?
It's often the case, but not always the case. I guess, as you can imagine, with general practice, you get such a variety of presentations and expectations. So that would be a common one, though. People kind of at the height of their distress, at the peak of their wave, and looking for something to alleviate that, and as soon as possible, um, uh, it being a kind of hope, I guess. So just lost my train of thought. 1 second. So um, yeah, so I guess to go back to that briefly. So I guess on one hand we have, like, I remember being at a talk by Dickon Bettinger and asking him about addiction, and he kind of encapsulated what we've just spoken about, in a metaphor, like, kind of like there's two ways of listening to people, and two ways of listening to people in distress, we'll say. One way is to listen to that person with the assumption that there's something wrong with them that needs to be fixed. And then, therefore, you're going to get into a certain set of dynamics between the person who's listening and the person who's communicating. And in general practice, I guess that would involve, okay, so this person is depressed, or this person's got anxiety disorder. Therefore, it's talking therapies, it's social prescribing, it's antidepressants, or it's lifestyle changes. And then the person would have to work on one of those 4 or 5 things. We might mention other things as well. And then, but then the other kind of contrast, which I think what the well-being listening is about, in essence, is that that person has well-being within them, and there's nothing to be fixed, um, but that there is perhaps a lot of thinking that, if anything, we can help that person see through, or help them get in touch with the well-being that's already there.
Mm. Let me give you a little example, because I think it turns up in really simple ways. And so we run our training online, and one of the things we do on the introduction is we ask for a volunteer, and then we just show the group what well-being listening looks like, because it's really ordinary. It's nothing very sort of pizzazzy. And so we were talking with this chap the other day, and he was just explaining that he was just feeling a little bit overwhelmed. He was feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Ordinary guy. And well, one thing is, we think, well, that's not unusual. People feel overwhelmed, so there's nothing to really worry about. So when we're listening, we're not immediately sort of thinking, oh, what can we do to organize your diary? Or maybe what you need to do is this. So we're listening, and he's saying he's overwhelmed. So first of all, you go, yep, life can be a bit overwhelming sometimes. Let's listen a bit more. And then he just gave this really beautiful example of how he had dealt with his overwhelm the night before. And he just said, oh, I'd finished the day, and had a conversation with my wife, and my wife is quite talkative. And he said, I just needed a bit of time on my own. So I just said to her, do you mind if I just take myself off for a little bit? And he said, I just went into a room, I put on some fairy lights, and I watched the TV for a bit. And it was really interesting. And so we just talked around how he had intuitively realized he just needed to take himself away and to have a bit of downtime. And we just said, yeah, that's that bit of you that kind of you listened to and was looking out for you, is the bit to keep looking out for, because that's the bit that's going to give you really good guidance in your life. So that was a real short example. Now, one of the people that was listening to this as a demonstration, she said, goodness me, that's the last thing I ever would have thought to tell someone, is to go and sit in a darkened room, watch a TV, and put on some fairy lights. And what we're talking about here is, when people have a conversation and someone's in distress, it doesn't have to be extreme mental distress, just a bit of mental distress. we almost like go into a bit of an Agatha Christie mode, trying to think, how can we solve their distress by giving them some things to go and do? But the bit that we forget is they've actually got the answer themselves. So well-being listening is very much around helping someone find their own answer. Because the person who commented on that said, I would have told that person, get out, go for a walk and do this. But in that moment, what was right for him was just to give himself a bit of downtime. So that's a really simple example of it's not, it's so intuitive and natural what we're talking about. And we're having people start to trust that bit of them that is wanting them to get back into mental well-being and balance. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense, Liz. And I think anyone listening probably, it makes sense to anyone listening as well, because we all have, I guess, just an internal common sense that knows what's good for us and what's not good for us. And we follow that all the time. And sometimes we follow it less, and sometimes we follow it more. Um, but like, I guess, connecting your story with my medical training and my general practice, we don't hear of that way of helping people. If that makes sense. So we don't hear, for example, that phrase you use is that the person has the answers. Um, so like we're kind of trained to be the solution givers often, rather than facilitate that solution arising in the person's own experience. And I guess on one hand, part of me wonders, well, what if we had some of this training, some well-being listening training? And another part of me thinks, well, maybe, maybe there's a role for the solution, maybe there's a role for us. But I guess I just wonder how much like how much it would change the mental health system if people in distress had the opportunity to speak to someone who's trained in well-being listening, who's trained to just offer that space, that heartfelt connection, and I guess just point people back to their own wisdom, common sense, and to see, yeah, to see things a little bit clearer, I guess, because we tend to see things a little bit clearer when we have the space to be heard and listened to.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, certainly with the training that I had as a counselor, and that was a long time ago, so things might have changed, and a coach, was there was a kind of underlying element that people need to be happy all the time. I thought I needed to be happy. That was why that's what caused me the biggest distress in my life, is when I wasn't happy all the time. I thought there was something wrong with me because I'd done all this blimmin' training and I should know better. And I think there's something that's quite a relief for people when they actually realize that being human is actually it's a whole bunch of experiences and emotions. And in the same way that, I can look out here and look out of my window and see a blue sky and trees and white clouds, and we have a whole spectrum of color that we can experience. And I've got colors I prefer over others, but it's the same with our emotions. We're kind of designed to feel them all. And I think what I've really seen, and I'd love your take on this, is I've really seen is that often when I see my mental distress and anxiety more as sort of like a little alarm saying, oh, you just need to look after yourself now. As soon as I start to see it like that, rather than it's something I need to suppress and get rid of and what's wrong with me, then I find that I have a much more gentle relationship with the sort of undulation of emotions that I experience day to day. Does that kind of fit in with what you see too, Bryan?
Yeah, I think it fits in with my experience of this understanding, I guess, of coming across it, and um, I guess just having a more accepting relationship of myself and of others, um, and being okay to really listen to the distress or the excitement of another person. That whole spectrum of what we can experience, and knowing that it's all okay, it's all okay, it's all part and parcel of being human. And I guess what's been really powerful for me as a GP to see is how even people in quite deep distress. So like I think I mentioned this to you before, but I've had 2 patients who presented with clinical depression whom I had a good connection with, and perhaps that was part of it. I really got on with them when I met them, but I recommended that they listen to some podcasts, and both of them read Michael Neill's Inside Out Revolution, and both of them came back within 1 to 2 weeks, and they felt significantly better. They were no longer clinically depressed. Um, and I followed them up a few months later, and again they were still okay. You know, they were much better, and that really amazes me. And I've seen it also, I guess, in more well-known people who write about this. So Dr. Bill Pettit had 20 years of clinical depression, and he came out of it after coming across this. And Terry Rubinstein, who wrote The Exquisite Mind, also describes being at a psychiatrist, taking Prozac, and being able to shift that completely with this understanding. So there's something about that idea of, even if you experience deep distress, being pointed back to what's behind or what's beyond that distress, that's more who you are than that distress, can be completely life-changing for some people. And I guess it just really inspires me as someone with an interest in mental health, that
Mm.
that kind of transformation can occur.
So I'm kind of curious now with you as a GP, and you obviously got an interest in mental health and antidepressants, and how does this play out though for you? If someone comes to you, would that be your initial take, that you would recommend, for example, they listen to podcasts or read a book, or how does it work?
Yeah, so I guess I could talk about this for hours, but I'll keep it brief. So I rarely prescribe an antidepressant on first consultation. I typically listen as well as I can and as deeply as I can, and try and reframe their experiences, just like kind of you did with that gentleman in your Zoom call. That, you know, it sounds like you're overwhelmed, or it sounds like you're feeling really low, and that's, you know, that's okay. That's a really common thing to experience. And so I try to empathize and make a connection and feel a connection. And then often, yes, I do recommend podcasts or videos or books, depending on what people learn best with. Um, and then in terms of antidepressants, I guess we this the like there's something like I think something like 4,000 studies on antidepressants. Like, there's so many,
Wow.
there's a huge amount. But what we know from the studies is that there's a really significant placebo effect. And some people would say, some experts would say it's around 60%. Others would say up to 90%. From what I read, it's nearish to 90%. So if you, all the studies, basically the study question, and this is how science works, is do antidepressants work? That's usually the essence of the question, at least initially. But if we reframed that question to, does the placebo work? Or does the power of the mind work? Or are we meaning making people? If the change happens in like in to a 90% degree in the people who take a tablet that has nothing in it, then that points to me that points to the understanding that the mind is really powerful and can bring about really big changes if we think, and we know, if we think we're going to get better, and if we think that we're in a relationship with someone who can help us get better. So and I don't hold back from telling people that, because I think that's really important. I think it's part of informed consent. Um, so it, to me, I guess there's a part of me that feels really frustrated that I'm in this system where 1 in 6 people is on an antidepressant, and I feel that that could be less, you know. And I'm not like a brick wall. I do prescribe antidepressants, and I have very open conversations with people about them. But I also see the potential that people could recover without them in perhaps a lot more instances um, than would be now if there was a different kind of, for want of a better word, system or understanding in place.
Mm, I'm blown away with what you've just said there about the placebo effect. I had no idea with antidepressants it was so high. And as you say, doesn't that just show that there's something else going on? Wouldn't it be great if we could tap into that something else for the healing in people?
Yes, yes.
And we're certainly working with our social prescriber, lead social prescriber has been on our wellbeing listening training, and her mental, I forget the names, I think it's they call them mental health coach in our surgery in Ivy Bridge. She's very much involved in this aspect of work. And the other thing, just kind of tying in with what you were saying there, because the other thing I think that particularly social prescribers find is sometimes a bit challenging is that they sometimes find that although there are lots of available services for people to access, sometimes people find it hard to engage with what is out there. So it's not that there isn't a service out there for them to engage with, or a community group or a club or whatever they're pointing to. And it was really interesting. One of the social prescribers who came on our training, she came from a different part of Devon. But one of the things that she said is that she said she's starting to notice that people are, because she's listening to them differently, that the people are more willing to engage with some of the services that are being offered, which I thought was kind of interesting too.
Mm.
So I have a sense that what we're talking about here and listening for well-being, whether it's with you and your patients in the surgery, where they may be at that level where they really do need some support from the medical profession, but there's a lot of other people, I would imagine, that are on the cusp of coming to you, or maybe come to you but don't really need to see a doctor, that could really be supported by just being listened to and heard in a different way, so that which makes the placebo effect happen, that is kind of sparked in them, so that they start to re-engage and feel more engaged in life again. I mean, that would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be amazing, Liz. And like, there's a couple of definitions of the placebo effect. So one is where the mind, through positive suggestion, improves health and well-being. But there's another. There's also an idea that the placebo is all about meaning making. So it's the kind of idea of someone taking a medication prescribed by a doctor is this whole host of meaning making events that happen in the mind of a person. And what you were describing about um, one of the social prescribers finding that people are more open to other things after listening in a different way. I guess what tends to happen is that when we're in distress, our worldview becomes really narrow. But if we're listened to in a certain way, and if we feel connected to someone, and if we feel a sense of um, trust and openness from that person, then our options start to open up a little bit more. So we might be a little bit more open to something like talking therapies, or we might be more open to something that sounded ridiculous at first, maybe going for a walk every morning with the group of people. But when we're listened to and we sense that connection, we're more open to hearing something new. And I imagine that's where part of it is. Um, and I guess there's meaning making happening on both sides, isn't there? So when the person who's listening from your training is kind of being, for want of better words, being given the kind of affirmation that their listening counts, it really counts, then that changes something for the listener as well, because you're able to trust in yourself a little bit more. You're able to trust in you just listening and the questions arising, the right questions arising for the right person.
Mm.
And perhaps any suggestions or anything that comes from that listening space will be empowered by a little bit more confidence. And that confidence comes from presence. It's all a little bit challenging to describe, but I think we all know about it. When we're really listening to our loved ones, for example, we know when we're listening, and we know when we're being listened to, and we know kind of the level of of the listening involved. There's a certain quality about it. So yeah, I'm going to pause there and pop back to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. But certainly I really get what you're saying about when we're in mental agitation, that we have a much more narrow bandwidth in a way. And there's something in the dynamic of listening that seems to relax that and allow well, I was going to say more things in, but I don't think it's more things in. I think it's more things to come out. It's almost like we become more able to engage with with what's right for us, our natural sort of balancing system for our mental health. So that's one thing. And also what you were saying here, which I think is really important, is almost the affirmation for people that listening is that the listening in its own right is the medicine. Listening is the medicine, not what your prescription is. Like, oh, what they need to do is this and this. So that's kind of come a bit clearer for me just in this conversation, really, is that there is real power in that, in just being with someone and being present and listening. I don't know about you, but oh my goodness, when I'm in a bit of a grumpy mood, if my husband starts giving me advice as to what he thinks I should do, like maybe you should go for a walk, or have you thought of doing this? I kind of get really riled. Um, but actually, when he just listens to me, and it might just occur to me, oh, I just need to go for a walk, which is exactly what he would have been exactly right with his prescription, but it needed to come. I needed to see it for myself, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. So I'm wondering whether we might have any kind of concluding comments or anything else that we need to address, Liz. Um, did you want to tell us a little bit more about your well-being listening, just kind of the nuts and bolts of it, just a little bit more?
Yeah. So the wellbeing listening training is all online. Obviously, with COVID, it's had to be online, but there are some real benefits with that, because it means that the group can come from different areas, and it takes place over usually a 4-week period, 1.5 hour sessions. And we also have 2 optional group mentoring sessions that people can opt into if they just got sort of questions that they want to ask. So that's the sort of the nuts and bolts practicality of it. And we run them, at the moment, we're running them 4 times a year. And we've got one in February and we've got one in April. And we also, once you've done the training, we also have, we just call them drop-in sessions, keeping in the conversation sessions, which are, we do about 10 a year. Sometimes they're during the day, sometimes they're in the evening. And it's just really connecting with like-minded people that are wanting to engage in this kind of work. But it's very much, I want to be really clear that we're really engaging with, I call it the grassroots. It's just, if you want to listen better to your family or to your work colleagues, to your clients, it's neighbors, it's those everyday conversations which I really see can be completely enriched with this kind of listening. And my hope is that as more people listen like this, it will mean less people get to the stage where they feel they need to have medical intervention, because it's almost like, as a community, we're understanding how best to listen to people so that we can keep them grounded in their mental well-being.
Amazing. Okay. And how can anyone sign up to the?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a special rate for people in Ivy Bridge, which is subsidised. It's £60. We're very fortunate. The local co-op here is supporting our cause this year, so we're able to subsidise Ivy Bridge people. And the full rate is 130 for the training per person.
Okay. And how would they get in touch with you? How would they find you?
If you go to innercompassguide.com, innercompassguide.com, we have the courses, all the relevant courses on there, but you can just drop me an email from there and that would be great.
Super. Okay. Great, Liz. So I hope people got something from this.
And let me just get your details as well. So if people want to get hold of you, Bryan, how can they do that?
I have quite a detailed website, bryanmcelroygp.com. It's got lots of mental health resources, and I keep a blog, an active blog, with some of my own material, but also just resources that I come across that I feel are useful, particularly for anxiety, and particularly for anxiety around COVID at the moment. I have a YouTube channel that I'm quite excited about, and I'm on Twitter as well. And people can find my contact details through my website. And if people have any questions, or perhaps if they have any questions that they'd like to ask me or Liz or both of us, Liz and I would both be open to having another conversation, because this conversation was really just about making this connection and seeing, well, almost putting it out there as a possibility to the universe that, how could GPs and benefit from this? How could the wider world benefit from this? Because it's something we're both really, really excited about and see real potential for.
Totally. Oh, Bryan, it's been an absolute delight connecting with you today. And I'm, well, if nobody asks any questions, I still want to connect with you again and have a conversation. So we can do that.
Sure.